Okay, it's 6:30, so let's go ahead and get things started with some brief introductions. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer, and I am the Adult Service Librarian at the Clearview Library District. And it is my pleasure tonight to have with us Claire Richardson from Preserving with Purpose, as well as native Windsorite Tom Macy, who's going to be sharing some memories with us from his very interesting and storied life. We did previously have Severance Town Board Trustee Dennis Kane scheduled for tonight, but unfortunately he did have to cancel at the last minute. We are looking to reschedule him at another date and time, and as soon as we get that date confirmed, we'll definitely send out emails and notices to let everyone know. But in the meantime, Tom Macy definitely graciously stepped in for us here, so we're really grateful to you for that, Tom. So a couple of other things before we get started. You'll notice that your mics are muted, and they will be muted for the duration of the interview. However, if you have questions, you can go to the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen with your mouse, and click on the little chat icon and type in your questions. And after the interview, or at the end of the interview, Tom and Claire will look at them and address them in the order that they were received. Also, if you really like what you heard tonight, this interview is actually part of a series that we're doing through the month of September called Capturing a Generation. And so on the 17th, we will actually also be hosting Windsor teacher and current library friend Joanne Perko. And on the 22nd, we will be hosting Kathy Rickard, who along with some other family members owns and runs the Tiggs Farm, which is off of County Road 64. And so without further ado, I'll actually stop talking and let Claire and Tom take things over. So.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Claire Richardson. I am the founder of a company called Preserving with Purpose, and we capture the life stories of individuals on video, on audio recordings, and through custom books. And we are so excited to just be a part of the Clearview Library District and being able to interview several individuals for this Capturing a Generation event. It's something that I'm truly passionate about. I love being able to hear the stories. As you guys will see, there are 4 unique individuals who have lived in Windsor and just have such unique, Windsor and Severance, and have such unique backgrounds and history with both of those towns, and it's just so much fun to discover that. So thank you again so much for being here, and like Jennifer said, if y'all do have questions, please direct those to the chat box, and we will make sure to address those at the end. So we have about an hour, and so we'll obviously get through as much as we possibly can. But knowing that if you do want us to dive into something, definitely put that in the chat box, and we will get to that at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Tom Macy. He has been living in Windsor for 68 years, so you can definitely call him a Windsor native. And I don't want to give away too much of his story, so I definitely want to have you all listen to it directly from his mouth. So thank you so much, Tom, for being here with us tonight. Yeah, well, let's get started. So I want to find out how your family actually came to reside in Windsor, Colorado.
Okay, my mom and dad, well, my mom grew up in Cicero, a suburb of Chicago. It was she grew up in a home that had indoor plumbing. It was a great house, not rich by any means. Her parents were immigrants from Lithuania, but they grew up she grew up in Cicero. My dad grew up in a small town in Iowa. He loved the outdoors. He loved the small town environment. He loved just to be outside. When they got married, they moved to an even smaller town in Iowa. They moved into a 2-room house, 1 room upstairs, 1 room down. The bathroom was an outhouse. The only running water they had was from a pump. Mom had to go out and get the water out of a pump, bring it inside, use it in the sink, and the sink emptied into a bucket. She had to take it outside and dump it outside. to go to the bathroom. It was the outhouse, freezing weather, downpouring rain. If she wanted to use the bathroom, she had to go outside. This wasn't a big deal to my dad. It was a big deal to my mom. And but my dad loved the outdoors. So when the opportunity came to perhaps invest in or to buy a resort in the wilds of Canada, he thought this would be a great opportunity. So he took his wife, and they headed north to check it out. In my mom's words, she said it was like going back in time. She said it was like sitting around a campfire with a bunch of cavemen. He said they cooked their dinner over the open fire, the kids running around half undressed and dirty. She said, and she and my dad did not see eye to eye on this little venture. Before they could make a decision, my grandfather, my dad's dad, sent a telegram to my dad and said, "Don't make any decisions yet. I've found something that's going to be really good." And it was a small town weekly newspaper in Windsor, Colorado. So that satisfied everybody. Everybody was happy. They moved to Windsor, and by the end of 1948, I'd been born, so the three of us were here in Windsor in 1948.
So your dad had such a love of the outdoors. What was his draw to the small town newspaper?
He majored in journalism at Grinnell College. So it fit right in with what his major was. And here he could still go to the mountains. He was close to the Rockies. He could go out and go hunting. And so he had a little bit of everything. It worked out well for him. That's why they took over. My grandfather at Harvard, he did something with school, the law review, the paper they had there. So he knew about newspapering, and my dad did, and this was it turned out to be a family venture here.
And I'm sure your mom was very happy.
She was delighted to be in Windsor.
Yeah. So tell us about this newspaper. What was it? What did it become? What did your family make of it?
Well, like I said, it was a family business. My grandparents were down there working. My parents were down there. As we got older, that my dad and mom had us, my two brothers and I, we would be janitors. We would sweep the floors. And as we got older, they let us run the little printing presses that we could do like business cards and announcements. And then when we got like in high school age, they let us actually run the big press that actually printed and folded and packed the papers. We got to do all that. And it was just a completely family run operation. My dad really had the idea that the newspaper should be it was important for a community, especially in a democratic kind of environment where we all had to make, like we have an election coming up. It would be important to get all the information out, both sides of every picture out. He said that the place for opinions and points and your own personal feelings was on the editorial page. His perspective was that the press had to be fair and balanced and present both sides of the picture in order for the people to make an informed decision. Sure. And that was the driving force behind all his editorial, all his news, all the printing, all the running of the newspaper was based on that.
So how long was the Windsor Beacon around for?
Well, I'm not sure when it actually, I should have looked this up before to find out exactly when it was founded. I think it was sometime in the 1800s. But I know through the Windsor Library now you can get online issues back as far as 1908. But back then it was called the Poudre Valley. I think it was in 1947, that early 48, when they actually changed the name to the Windsor Beacon.
Okay. And then how long did your family own the Windsor Beacon? Like how long were they on it?
Well, they bought it in 1949 and then, or 48, and then they sold to a corporation about 1968, 69. I don't remember exactly when it was. But prior to that selling, my dad could write the editorials. Any editorial he wanted to write, he could write. And he being a more liberal-minded person in a more fairly conservative community, he oftentimes got a lot of feedback on his editorials and some of his comments. People didn't like it, a lot of them. Even though the news as it was reported was across the board, his opinion didn't come into that, but at the editorial page it did. It didn't matter to him if people threatened to sue him. He didn't have anything. He says, I asked him, I says, we're not going to get anything if they sue me. It's not going to matter. I mean, I'm not going to get anything. Well, when he sold to a corporation, the corporation started getting feedback, and that became a problem. And they told him to tone down some of his editorials, and he said, well, I'm not going to do that. So he sold the paper, and that would have been in 1974. And he moved to Keensburg and bought the Keene Valley Sun, where he could have his own paper again. Yeah. But in 1974, that's when they left the business.
So did you enjoy working there as a child and growing up?
I loved working there, but I saw how hard they worked. And when before they sold the paper, they wanted to know if any of their children wanted to take it over. That was before they even sold it. And or sold to the corporation, the 50-some%. We saw how hard they worked, and none of their kids wanted to go into the newspaper business. I mean, it was as bad as being a dairy farmer. You had to be, every Thursday something happened. The paper had to go out. So every day they had to be there doing something. And it was a hard job, hard work. Yeah. I didn't want to do that.
So what was it like for you growing up in Windsor?
That was, I thought about that question a lot. We could probably spend the next hour on what it was like in Windsor. Some of the general feelings. Growing up, Windsor was just a sleepy farming community. It was farmers mostly. On Sunday afternoon, you could see farmers sitting on the streets talking and just visiting, and most of the stores were closed on Sundays, but people would still hang around and talk. Farmers would drive their tractors through town. It was not a big deal. And basically the makeup of the community was basically Germans that had immigrated from Russia and from Germany. And some of the older ones, the streets were basically all dirt. There was one, maybe Main Street was paved, but most of the rest were all dirt to begin with. And you could find some of the older Russian ladies with their little babushkas on their head with their brooms out sweeping the dirt streets to keep them clean. Windsor was coming from, with that kind of background, it was, they wanted everything to be neat and kept well. And Windsor it was one of the nicest little communities in the area. Well kept, everything was done, it was well done. People took pride in the community. There were basically two big industries or businesses here at the time. One was the sugar factory, which was by far the biggest employer. It was a seasonal business, but it took the sugar beets from the farmers who grow the sugar beets, and they'd go there and make sugar at the sugar factory, the beet factory. And one of the fun things about being in town at that time was the corner of 7th and Walnut was one of the main places where the beet trucks would come into town and turn at that corner. When they turned, beets would roll off the truck. And as kids, we would sit there with our wagons. We would load the beets up into the wagons and take them. We had a friend who liked to make, Alex Bruner was his name. He liked to make beet syrup. And so we would take all the beets to his place. They'd boil them down into this beet juice kind of stuff, real sweet, and they'd make this beet syrup out of it. And then his wife would make maple sticks. And oh, they were so good. And I thought was my payment, I think, was getting maple sticks for delivering beets to them. So that was just one of the fun things we could do. And then the other big employer wasn't a very big employer, but it was a big business, was the hay mill on the east side of town. there's a little trucking business there now, but they used to cut all the hay and take it into the hay mill. The neat thing about the hay mill was when the hay was in, they would run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with 2 shifts, 6 to 6 were the shifts. And they would hire college kids to drive the trucks and to be mill helpers. We could do basically one whole shift with just college kids. And we would switch every week. We would change from day shift to night shift to day shift to night shift. But working with all college kids, it was a blast. We had a lot of fun. And so that was one of the other things that was kind of unique about the community. There were a lot of, just like now, you go walk down Main Street, it's family-run businesses. You can look and you can see the stores, the small businesses run by families. What it was back then. We had, there was 2 drugstores with soda fountains, which was kind of cool. They had, there were some cafes, there was a appliance store, there was an electrician store, all kinds of stuff. There was a movie theater. We had a movie theater right where Pike's Auto used to be downtown. There was a movie theater there. It was one of the big marquees that stuck out over the sidewalk and real fancy, and it was a big deal. We'd go there for 15-cent movies. And during the summer, the sugar factory would bring in migrant laborers from Mexico to work in the fields to do the weeding and stuff. And so on Sunday afternoons, all the movies were in Spanish. If you wanted to go to a Spanish movie, you could. And we were taking Spanish in high school. Some of us would go there just to
catch up on your
the movie, catch it up in Spanish.
Yeah.
It was just a cool time. There was just a couple thoughts that came to my mind. We used to spray for mosquitoes with fogger, and back then we didn't know all the problems with the dangers of all these chemicals. And all us kids with our bikes, it was a blast to run behind the fogger and run our bikes in and out of the fog, and just having to follow the fogger around town, running in and out. And then there was one year they didn't do the fogger. Instead, they hired crop dusters to come in and dust over the town.
Oh my gosh.
And so it was just you think about all those things. I'm surprised I'm still around.
Yeah.
But it was a great town. It was a great town to grow up in. There was, like I say, the traffic was little. It was a sleepy community. We could ride our bikes anywhere, got on our bikes. We'd ride out in the country. It was just a fun place to be.
Yeah. And what you talked about the movie theater, was there ever a restaurant that you and your family went to, or like a diner or a cafe that you can recall the name of it and maybe some of the food that they served?
I don't remember. I remember I had a friend in Bob Gurgley in school. His dad ran the depot, the train depot that was in town. There was a lot of produce and everything was shipped in, and materials were shipped in by train. And his mom ran a little cafe downtown. I don't remember what it was called, but we go there for hamburgers because it was great. It was good. That's what I remember is her little cafe. Yeah. It was like between 6th and 5th on the south side of the street.
Yeah. How early, I know you worked at your dad's, the Windsor Beacon. Did you have other jobs when you were younger, or when you started to?
Yeah, it was, being in a farming community, there were a lot of jobs open to us, especially in the summer and the fall. The summer we go out and hoe beets, or we could stack hay different times throughout the year. Always had need for people to go out and stack the hay. There was always jobs to be, if you wanted to work, there was jobs that you could do. I just was thinking back, some of the activities we did in the summertime, we liked to fish. And as a kid, the way we could make money was take the carp and the suckers we caught, and there were certain people around town we knew that would buy them from us for like 5 or 10, depending on how nice what condition they were in. we shot them with a bow and arrow and brought them in. Most of them didn't want to buy them, but if we hooked them with a hook and brought them in, they would buy them from us, 5 or 10 cents a piece. And I look back and I think, man, they must have just laughed at the kids and just tried to be nice to us and bought our suckers and our carp from us. But yeah, we'd make some money that way too as kids.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of different opportunities.
Yeah. So what year did you start high school?
I started high school in 1962.
Okay.
That's the year I started.
Okay. And what was high school like for you?
Well, it was great. We loved the Windsor schools. We loved all the way from grade school all the way up to graduation. Every school, it was great to be here in Windsor. One of the things I liked to do was argue with my teachers. And we had an algebra teacher that, well, again, one of my friends, he was dad of one of my friends. And we'd have the algebra together. And one day I argued with the teacher about a story problem, thinking that he had it wrong and I had it right. And pretty soon I had his son arguing my side against his dad. And I think we were probably both wrong, but the teacher was right, but it was still fun to do that. But they prepared us well, the high school prepared us well for college. One of my pet peeves is I like to tease my kids about their language, not just my kids, but also my grandkids. When we graduated, we knew the difference between objective and subjective pronouns. And today, people say, me and John went to the store, me and so-and-so did this. That is bad English. And we knew that when we graduated from high school, we knew what objective and what the difference was between objective and subjective pronouns. And so they prepared us well. Math, everything we went to college. Anybody went to college really had no problem with fitting in and with the classes and what we were faced with there. It was, you think about people, one of the biggest complaints about kids when you ask them about school, it's school food. People make jokes about school food. Well, when we were in high school and grade school, the food was all homemade. I mean, the cooks made it was like, it wasn't school food, it was homemade food. There was homemade kraut burgers, and they were great. Thursdays were always homemade roll days. They made their own rolls, homemade roll days. The pies, they made pies, and they were it was great. I mean, there was no jokes about school food back then. It was in Windsor, the cooks made, it was super food. It was great food.
And I know when you and I had talked before, you said that the schools were funded differently. Can you talk about that?
Initially they were, because there were people on again, a very conservative community, and they didn't like government sticking their fingers into everything we did. One of the ways to avoid that is to not take government money. Anytime government gives money, there's always strings attached. That was what I didn't follow all the politics when I was a kid, but I heard my dad talking, and he would sit down and tell me about it. And he said there was one particular school board member that really pushed never taking money from the government, that if we needed to buy anything or do anything, have the community fund it, because that way we could do what we wanted to do, and the government didn't tell us what we had to do. So I don't know when that changed, but when they first moved here, and for a number of years, that's the way the funding was done. If anything was done, it was done through the community, and only through the community.
Okay. And there was a fire at the Windsor High School, is that correct?
It was the middle school,
Okay.
or the junior high. At that time, the junior high school burned. That was 1964.
Okay. And did that affect you at all, or were you involved in that, or?
Yeah, that was, well, it was a big deal, because you could see the flames lit up the whole sky. So all the kids and their bikes, everybody was running down to the school to check it out and see what was going on. And the junior high it was flames. You could see it starting in the roof, but the fire hadn't gotten to the bottom yet. And the principal's office was on the first floor, so a bunch of us kids went in to help. The principal was in there trying to get his records out. We would help carry the records out of the office and get them out. And finally they stopped this. I guess it was unsafe for some reason for kids to be doing that. But it burned the whole thing. I mean, it was unworkable. It took them it was like 1966 before they actually had another school built. That until then they had barracks stuck around in the parking lot in the back that we could go to school in.
Okay. I have to ask, did you cause any mischief as a child or in high school?
I was one of the good kids. I did the one thing that I did do that was kind of, I thought it was funny. And that was I thought a helium balloon weighted just right. The breeze would blow it across the street. And I like to see what the cars would do when they saw a balloon going right across the street in front of them. Well, it worked better than I thought. The wind breeze was just right. It was dark at night. And I think it must have been cloudy because I just remember it wasn't much light at all. And the balloon started moving across the street. And all of a sudden, it was still a dirt street in front of our house. This car came down and was fishtailed back and forth and almost ran off the road. And I ran and hid, but it turned out it was our band teacher at the high school. And I don't think he ever found out who did that, but I heard he thought it was the kid that was actually, or he's trying to avoid hitting a kid.
Oh
so
my
that,
goodness.
That was the last time I did that. But one of the funnest thing, one of the most interesting things that happened as a kid was that there was a bunch of high school kids, not me, that wanted to do something unique against one of our rivals. Eaton, the town of Eaton was our big rival. Basically, they were settled by mostly Swedish people there. We were mostly German people here, and so it was a big rival. Well, before their homecoming game or something, we went over. The kids from Windsor went over and burned a big W in their football field, and they found out the administration found out who it was, and made them go over and apologize to Eaton in person. They had to go over and apologize to the town for what they did.
Did they have to replant the grass?
That was what?
Did they have to replant the grass?
They didn't. I didn't hear about. I don't think they did, but they had to. They had to at least apologize, and that was a big deal to do that. To go in front of them and do that. I did have a friend one time that he liked to dabble in, he liked to load his own gun shells and stuff. He liked to dabble in different things, and he made his own M80 one 4th of July, really a big bomb is what it was. And we went in front of one of our, I followed him, and I just wanted to see what he did. So he went and stuck it in the front yard of one of our teachers and set it off. And I took off. I wasn't going to stick around and see what happened, but it was just, anyway, those were the kind of fun things, little things like that we did.
Yeah, that were very innocent at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an astronaut. And
did that come to fruition?
No, obviously not. I'm sitting here in Windsor. But it was a serious consideration. When I got out of high school, I applied, took all the testing, and applied with congressmen and everything. I wanted to get an appointment to the Air Force Academy, because that would be a start along that road towards being an astronaut. Well, I got what they call an alternate appointment, which wouldn't be enough to get into the academy, because the guys ahead of me would have taken it. And so I knew it wasn't going to happen. So I went to CSU instead and joined the Air Force ROTC in hopes that I could follow it that way, majoring in math and computer science. And so that's sort of, it didn't ever really come to fruition. It never really became the astronaut that I wanted to be. After 2 years in ROTC, you had to make a commitment to actually join the service. The first 2 years, it was just basically a PE class. You didn't have to take PE because you were in ROTC.
Sure.
But after 2 years, in 1968, the war in Vietnam was really getting hot. And I figured I didn't want to really go fly airplanes and helicopters and things in Vietnam. So I backed out of the program and focused on computer science and math, and figured that was being in the front end of the computer field was it was a good place to be. So that was my dreams of being an astronaut ended, but I still like science fiction, and I still like using my telescope to look at the stars. So.
Yeah. So how was college for you as you continued on that career path or that educational path?
College was a really good time. I have some really good memories of those 4 years. But one of the first memories I have from there was going to a dorm dance. That's the way when you first got there, if you wanted to meet people, you want to meet girls, a lot of times you could go to the dorm dance. And if it was at a girls' dorm, that was even better because there would be a lot of girls there. So I think it was Corbett Hall had a dorm dance, and that was one half of that was guys, and the other half was girls, and they didn't mix at that time. If you were in a girls' dorm, you had to be in at a certain time, and guys couldn't go in. You had to sit in the lobby and wait for the girl to come down if you wanted to go out somewhere. It was really restrictive, and a lot of ways I wish it was still that way.
Yeah, I agree.
But so anyway, I was at the dorm dance, and it was a rainy night, and I was sitting there and just watching, and two girls walked in, and they were drenched. And I thought, boy, if they had enough after coming in from the rain, if they still wanted to come to a dance, I wanted to meet them. So I asked the redhead if she'd dance with me. And that night turned out really nice. She was really nice. So I thought I'd ask her for a date. So I called her up. She said, yeah, she'd go out with me. So that night I went to the Corbett Hall, sat in the lobby waiting for this girl, her name was Sandy, waiting for Sandy to come down. And this hot girl walked in. I took my eyes off of her. I was waiting for Sandy to come. And a few seconds later, she said, Tom? I looked up at her and I thought, man, when dried out and dressed up for a date, she was really hot. This is really good. So it was so that's where I met my wife, and my soon-to-be wife. Other highlights in college were I had my first quarter there. I had a calculus class, an advanced calculus class, and the teacher's name was Dr. Painter. He just recently passed away, and I went to his funeral at CSU because he really set the tone for me for college. And it was all the kids in his class, all of us could go. His goal was to teach. If we had questions, we could call him. We'd go over to his house. He would sit down with us and help us through the problems. Whatever we had, he would help us. A great guy. He's a wonderful man. And the day before the final, that night before the final, I stayed up, I studied, I was preparing for his class. I was all excited. I knew everything. It was great. The next morning, the phone rang. I got a call, and it was Dr. Painter, and he said, aren't you coming to take the final, Tom? And I said, yeah. I'd overslept. And so I ran down to the math building and ran into the class. Half the time was already gone. He gave me the test, said, here you go. I was one of the first ones done. I was moving on adrenaline. I went through all the tests, and basically I passed, got an A out of the class. But he thought enough of his students that he would even call me to ask me if I was coming to take the final.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so that was one of the highlights. And at during the 60s, that time, 66 to 69, there was all kinds of things going on. There was the rise of the Black Panthers. They were on campus at times. There was demonstrations, anti-war. Started out a lot of pro-war stuff on campus. By the time I graduated in 1969, 70, the demonstrations were all anti-war demonstrations, and Old Main, one of the main buildings, burned to the ground during that time. There was a lot of things going on. And then in 1969, I came to my parents and I said to my mom and dad, I said, I think I want to get married. I want to marry Sandy. And they told me, they said, I was still in college. I was a junior at that time. But when I told them this, they said, there's too much in life to experience. You don't want to get married yet. You have college to finish, and you got to go out. And so many things you can just experience and do before you settle down. And I said, there's not one thing I wouldn't rather do with Sandy that I could do. I'd rather do it with her if there's anything I wanted to do. And so that sort of settled it with them. They said, okay. And then in 1969, September 6th, anniversary is coming up this Sunday. We got married, and that was really the highlight of my college years. In fact, Sandy put me through my last year of college, which worked out well.
Yeah.
But then one of the low points of college came just about 3 months later. It was December 1st, I think it was 1969. There was the first draft for the Vietnam War, the first lottery draft, where they held a lottery to pull numbers to see your order in the draft. And so Sandy and I and a number of our friends got together and watched the draft. Well, my number was 68, which meant that when I graduated in June, I'd be heading off to the Army. So that was a pretty traumatic time for all of us as Sandy and I, and as we faced, those of us with low numbers faced that we knew what was going to happen. We knew we were going to get drafted. So that was sort of the low, but that was where there was a lot of positive things in our college years, a lot of good things, and there were some lows, and let me tell you a funny story. I didn't tell you this, Claire, when we talked initially, but my wife, when we got married, she worked as a checker. She graduated a year ahead of me in sociology. She couldn't get a job in sociology in Fort Collins, so she as a high school student, she checked at Safeway. So she became a checker at Safeway. Well, when the Black Panthers were in Fort Collins, she was checking at that time, and a couple of Black Panthers a number of them came through the Safeway store. Some of them stood at the front with their guns, and others just walked through the lines and bought stuff and take stuff through the lines. Well, one of my mom's friends named Betty, she didn't see bad in anybody. I mean, she didn't even realize a Black Panther was a Black Panther. He was just a person to her. And so this guy comes through the line. Sandy's next to Betty. This guy comes through Betty's line, and she looks up at him and says, "Well, how's your day going?" And he mumbles something, and she says, "Well, it's a good day. Are you a coach or something?" She says, and he says, "No." He says, "Well, what's that around your neck? It looks like a whistle." And he says, "Lady, that's a bullet." And she said, "Well, it looks like a whistle to me." And she just kept talking and checking his stuff. And when he left, she says, "Have a good day." And he looked back like mortified that some lady wasn't even worried about his bullet or the demeanor that he carried. Sandy told me that story when she got home, and I couldn't believe it. And because Sandy was sitting there saying, Eddie, don't do that. Just check him, get him out, get him. You know, he was worried about what he was going to do, and Betty didn't care a thing. So that was just one of the funny things that happened. Yeah.
So you were drafted, and I mean, that had to be a very emotional event when you're sitting on the couch, you're with your wife and with your friends, and you see your number called. So can you describe to us what that moment was like?
Well, it's like every number they draw, it's like you're praying that it's not your, well, it depends who you are. I had friends in ROTC that stuck it out, and they were gung-ho. They were ready to go to Vietnam and fight the whole thing, and they were raring to go. So a couple of them, they were every number that came, they were like, they wanted it to be their number. But there were some of us other people, the other guys there, that was the last thing we wanted. And every number pulled, we would pray that it wasn't our number. I had friends who had low numbers, and they went, as soon as they saw their number, they went and got braces on their teeth. Because if you had braces, they wouldn't draft you, because you had to deal with the braces, and so they would get out of the draft. If they found a dentist that would put them on, they'd get out of the draft. They wouldn't have to go. Others talked about going to Canada to get away from it. Sandy and I, after the number came up, it was like a blow, like and you knew what was going to happen. You knew it. If you didn't do something, you knew it was going to happen. And Sandy and I talked about it and said, well, we didn't want to get out of it by braces. We didn't want to get out of it by leaving the country. That wasn't going to work. So we decided just to stick it out and see what would happen. But it was really, to know your next 2.5 years were determined and what they were going to be. And it was something you didn't want, neither one of you wanted to be involved in. It made it tough.
So what was that like when you then, did you have to report somewhere? Did you at least get to graduate and kind of then everything started?
Yeah, a little bit about what it was like when you, upon graduation, I had maybe I had about a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks maybe, to get things in order, and I had to report down to Denver, and they loaded us on a bus and then to an airplane, and I flew out to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where we had basic training. It was in Fort Knox. And really, the group I was in, it was most of us were college graduates. There were a couple of the young men in our group, in our platoon, or in our company that had a choice: go to prison or go to the Army. And a couple of them had chosen to go to the Army instead of going to prison. So we had a wide range of people from. But most of us were college graduates, and we approached it, logically, and how to make it all work. And it was, you look at it, I look back at it, and it was the actual basic training was a fun time. Sure. I got bigger muscles than I'd ever had in my life. And my wife and I came home, one time they gave us a 3-day holiday because we were doing so well, our company. So another guy and I from Colorado said, well, we've got 3 days. Let's fly home to Colorado and see our wives. We weren't supposed to do that, but we did it. We flew home to Colorado, and Sandy said when I walked in, she was like, who's this big old hunk standing here in the doorway? Something, because everything had changed on me. It was a lot different. And so we were there for a day, and then this other guy flew back, and we made it back, and nobody was the wiser. But instead of boozing it up and messing around in Fort Knox, we were back in with our wives, and then back in time for basic training. Then came the time. At the end of basic training, they posted your names and what your MOS would be and where you would be going after basic training. Mine came out to be, I kept trusting that God would not let me have to go and shoot someone. I didn't want to have to be in that position. I didn't want to do that. Sure. Well, when they posted where we were going out of basic training, my assignment was to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which meant I would be going as a grunt to Vietnam, basically, in the infantry, and doing things, shooting people, being shot at, which is something, be in a position to kill someone. I didn't mind if I went maybe as a conscious objector and worked as a medic of some kind and doing something to help somebody, but to go and shoot, I didn't want to do that. So when I got that, the first orders that came out were to go to Fort Polk. I called Sandy and told her, and you can imagine she's crying on the phone, which just has me in tears, telling her what's going on. And when we finally hung up, and I just left the barracks, and like Job, when in the Bible, he's complains to God about everything that's happening to him. Why is it happening? Why is all this, all these things happen to him? And so I was yelling at God, and I went to the chapel there and asked the guy if I could get a conscious objectorship and work as a chaplain or go to Vietnam instead of with carrying a gun to go help somebody instead. He's, no, at the point of there's nothing you can do to change your orders. You're stuck. So I finished the talk with God and realized, God's got my back. Whatever happens is going to happen, and God's will is going to be done. It's going to be fine one way or the other. And I was fairly peaceful. At the end of the night, I come to grips with it, and was at peace with going. If I had to go to Vietnam, that it would be okay. God would make it work right. The next day, I got a call from the company commander. He called me into his office and said, Tom, or he said Macy is what he said, my last name. Macy, I don't know how you did this, but your orders got changed. You're going to some place called Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And I didn't know. He says, do you know where that is? I says, I never heard of it. I asked him, do you know where it is? He said, he never heard of it either. But my orders got changed, and when I was going there, my MOS was 01 Echo, changed to that, which meant I was going to be a computer programmer. I could work in my field. Sandy could go with me. And it turned out when I got there that if Sandy did come with me, I could live off post. I could rent an apartment, live off post. So being in the Army was basically a daytime job. I'd go to the post during the day and go home at night, and weekends and vacations, and it was great. It wasn't the funnest place for single people because it was out in the middle of nowhere, but for being married, it was a good place to be.
Yeah. How did you guys then, you go to this place and it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. How did you guys end up getting back to Windsor?
That was a long process. There was at the 1970, the war was winding down. In 1972, the war was winding down. So I got a 6-month early out from the Army. The job I took was with Kodak, because Kodak was building a plant in Windsor. So I thought, if I got a job with Kodak, I could come back to Windsor. Well, the interview was in Rochester, New York, and they wanted to make me an offer for a job, but they said it was for Kodak Park in Rochester, and there was no chance I'd be coming back to Windsor. Well, Sandy and I, even though they said there was no chance, we thought, we want to get back. It's going to happen. We'll get back. So I took the job and worked there, and we never really settled in. We kept an apartment. We never bought a house. We attended a church, never joined the church because I figured we were going to be coming back to Colorado. We made a lot of friends, but we always were to consider ourselves tentative. And then my boss called me in one day to his office, which he did periodically. He called me in and he said, Tom, so we had a Bible study together, he and I and a number of other people. And he called me and says, Tom, you're not really settling in here. You got to realize if God wants you in Rochester, New York, then you better be happy where you are. And it made me think back, Vietnam. God was teaching me a lesson back then, like to accept his will. And so I said, yeah, I think you're right. I talked to Sandy. We agreed that really my boss was right, that we really needed to come to grips with what God wanted in our life. And if he wanted us there, then we would stay there. So we prayed about it. We were happy about staying. We decided to make it our home. So we started looking for a house. We actually joined the church. We were getting set up to be baptized into I'd never been baptized. We were getting ready to be baptized into the church. And then then about 4 months after he had called me into his office, he called me back in for another talk, and he said, Tom, there's an opening now in Windsor, Colorado. Do you want it? And I said, yeah, we want to go back. So we took the job and moved back to Colorado. And it was like a lesson to me that God teaching us again that when we accepted his will, the doors opened.
Yeah.
And so we got back to Windsor and working for Kodak. And that's how we got back.
Yeah, I love that. So what were you guys' next steps? I mean, did you guys purchase a house, and then what other avenues or what other things did you guys get involved with once you got back here?
Well, when we got back, when we were in Fort Huachuca, our oldest daughter Sarah was born, and when we moved to Rochester, New York, our middle daughter Rachel was born. When we moved to Colorado, our son Adam was born. So we figured we're back in Colorado. We don't want to have any more kids. We don't want to move anymore. So we decided to stay in Windsor, and we have our three children, and now they have their own families and their own children. But that's, so to start with, we looked at what we could do in town. We wanted to get involved. So we joined a church right away, got involved. Our kids all got involved in the kids programs. Sandy and I got involved in teaching and in leading. We joined the church. I got baptized. We did all the things involved in the community. We started, my wife and I helped start a parent-child education center, which was one of the first preschools in town. We got involved doing that. There was, we wanted to, well, when we bought, you asked, the first question you asked was what we did for a house. Well, we got back, my parents at this point, I mentioned earlier that in 1974, they sold their business and moved to Keansburg. So we bought their house from them. We came back about 2 or 3 months after they'd left. So we bought their house, and they had a house with 4 acres on the west side of Windsor. If you're familiar with Windsor, it's right between where Sonic is and Taco Bell. Jimmy John's is right now right in the middle of where our pumpkin farm was. We bought 4 acres, or the house with 4 acres, and put a pumpkin farm in. We didn't know what else to do with 4 acres. We'd never done any real farming. And on the way to Greeley one time in October, we stopped by the Mahan pumpkin farm. And I talked with the couple there that ran that farm, and asked them how they started their business. And they gave us all the information, how they started, what they did. Windsor didn't have a pumpkin farm, so we thought this would be really cool. Have a pumpkin farm. I mean, how different is that? So that's what we did with the 2 acres in front of our house. With another couple, we started a pumpkin farm, and it was really a family activity. The kids all got involved, weeding, selling the pumpkins, all involved in helping out. It was supposed to be. It was a family activity. That's how we got into our house. We lived in that house till early 2000s, and that's what we did with the land. We had a pumpkin farm there.
And how long did you guys have the pumpkin patch, and how did it affect the community? Because I have to say that after I initially interviewed you, talking to other people, everybody knew about the Macy pumpkin patch. So you were really well known. So how long did you have the pumpkin patch, and how did it affect the community?
We started the pumpkin farm about 1975, because that was shortly after we got back. I didn't know what we were going to do with the land and to make it pay for itself. And at that point, we also had a donkey. My wife made me promise her that when we got married, she would have a donkey, a dog, and a duck, at least. So we got the donkey and we had the dog, and we ended up getting some ducks too. And so for the pumpkin farm, we had not only the pumpkins, but we had a sort of a mini petting zoo. We had the donkey, we had goats, we had pigs, we had calves for a while, we had the horse in the back corral, we had turkeys and chickens. And so people that came to the pumpkin farm could go out and they could feed the animals, they could pet the donkey and the animals, and they could feed them. And it was just a fun time. And we gave everybody a free gourd. When schools came, they got free gourds. And because we opened it up to school, we notified the schools what we had going there. And so schools would take field trips out to the pumpkin farm, and the kids all brought enough money, like $1 or something, they could get a pumpkin to take home with them, and they all get a free gourd. And my wife did all the basically the talking and the presenting of everything to the kids and talking to them about gourds. And it was a fun time. People came from all over, and one family came back every year, and they had a little compact car, some kind of what it was, I forget what it was, just a little car. They would load up the whole back with their pumpkins. When they left, the car would be tilted up. They'd be stuck looking in the air when they're driving down the road because it was so full of pumpkins in the back. There was a number of fun things that happened on the pumpkin farm. There was, I was working at Kodak. I missed a lot of the things because Sandy would be home during the day and she'd be meeting with the people that came in. One day, and Sandy told me this story when I got home one night from work. She said there was a lady that stopped by and with her son. And when they stepped out of the car, my wife said it was obvious that something was wrong with the boy. His head was bald and he looked frail and weak. And they walked around. They spent hours there just walking around looking at the pumpkins and the animals, and had a great time. And when they said goodbye, they left, and Sandy just enjoyed the whole time with them. And then a few years later, a young man drove up in a car, parked, and got out, and came up to Sandy and said, "I bet you don't recognize me, do you?" No, Sandy didn't know who he was. And he said, "Well, my mom and I stopped by here a few years ago." And he said, "My turnaround against cancer came on your farm. That's when everything turned around, is when we stopped here." So he came, and that brought tears. When Sandy told me she was crying, it brought tears to my eyes thinking about that.
Yeah.
That was quite the story, that he could come back like that.
Yeah, and that he did.
But Pumpkin Farm was a fun time. It was a time where we had family come out, not just our kids. We had the cousins and uncles and aunts, and my mom would come out, my aunt would come out, they would pick, and my mom made Indian corn necklaces. She'd get the Indian corn when it was still a little bit green, and she'd pop off the kernels and then string them on a heavy duty thread and make necklaces out of them. It took her hours to make one, and she'd sell them for $1 a piece.
Oh, so sweet.
So it was just fun things.
Yeah,
to do.
Well, you had such an amazing life in your journey all the way coming, living in Windsor and then leaving and then coming back. I mean, it's just such an impactful, and the way that you touch the community is so amazing, and you're still so involved in Windsor. And I know that we're close to that 7:30 mark, so I would like to kind of wrap this up before we go to some questions with, what you feel like has been the biggest change in Windsor from the time you were a young boy to now.
Well, I think about change. There's positive parts to change and there's negative parts to change. There's one of the I can start with I end with the positives. Let me start with the negative. The negative part of the change in the community is the loss of the small town culture, I think, and the freedoms it afforded. We were free to go anywhere. We could do anything. We could go out in the country, and if we wanted to hunt geese, we could go out in a farmer's field, just lay down and hunt geese. Yeah. It was lot of freedom that we don't have anymore. There was, the community was conservative, whereas now it's a lot more liberal in a lot of things. There was a lot of what I consider to be, I wish things were back the way they were. But that's the negative part of it. The positive part of it is that all the different, the good and the people coming in, there's such a wide range of people that you can meet, people with such varied backgrounds that make life much more interesting when you get to talk with them and visit with them and their backgrounds. You get to meet all kinds of different kinds of people. May not agree with them in a lot of the politics, but they're still, it's just fun. It's just interesting people to talk with and to be around. And then without growth, look what the community has become. I mean, we've got the Boardwalk Park. How could a little town like Windsor create something like Boardwalk Park? I mean, the little community, the farming community, that wasn't going to happen. It took a bigger community to create a resource like that. Windsor has so much going for it right now because of the growth that it's real positive things that are going on. Yeah. In fact, Kodak was one of the big deals about, when Kodak came in. I think Kodak helped make Windsor what it is today. And for those online here that may not know, on September 14th, a Monday coming up here in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, about a week and a half, I think, the town of Windsor is going to honor Kodak down at Boardwalk Park near the dock. There's going to be a ceremony at 4:30 honoring Kodak. So that's the town. I mean, it's become a lot of what it is because of Kodak and what Kodak did. So there's the positives, the good and the bad. I wouldn't change anything. Looking back, I'm happy with where Kodak's come, and if it wasn't for where it is now, I wouldn't be here. I'd be in some other big city working somewhere. Instead, I'm here in Windsor in my hometown. So all in all, I'm happy with where we are, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for being with us tonight, and thank you so much for sharing your story and all of your history and wisdom about Windsor. It's so fascinating to learn just even about the Windsor Beacon and your time being drafted, and then your pumpkin farm. It was so much fun. So thank you so very much. Well,
you're welcome. Sorry I took so long. I get carried away. I didn't realize it was 7:30 already. So
it's so fun. It always goes so fast with you, I feel like. So
life is good.
Go ahead. I know there was one question, but if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Again, if you take your mouse and go to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little chat box and you can type in there. One of Francie had a question of the name of the towns in Iowa that you were located or from.
My dad grew up in Linville, Iowa, which is about 15 miles south of Grinnell.
Okay.
The town they moved to was Searsboro, which is between it's like kind of an L getting to Linville. They're in the corner of the L. And Linville, we stopped by there to find my mom and dad's old house one time, the two-room house. We found it, and the town it hadn't changed much. It was still, but of course they had inside running water now, and they had sewer. But yeah. So those are the two towns.
Yeah, and I love those stories, especially of the housing, just to have even some of our kids understand the houses that our families lived in to the houses that we're all living in now. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people where they had 9 kids and they grew up in a 2-room house. It's just amazing and fascinating to kind of hear how they did that. So.
Yep.
So we've got some comments. Just thank you so much. I really enjoyed your story. Maybe we'll meet up on the streets of Windsor one day. That's Dan and Lynn. And then from Rachel, I believe that's your daughter. She said, I love you so much. So.
Well, I love them too. They're special.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll see a lot of these faces, or everybody out there will see Tom in Windsor. Definitely make sure to stop and say hello. He'll probably want to hear your story as well. So again, like Jennifer said, we'll be back. Jennifer, do you want to disclose that maybe next week or the week after?
Our next one on the schedule is Joanne Perko. She's going to be talking on September 17th. We are currently waiting to hear from Dennis to see when we will next reschedule his interview. So definitely stay tuned. We'll send out emails and change our or update our website to let people know when we have a confirmed date for him as well. But otherwise, I want to thank everyone. Like Claire, I want to thank everyone else for tuning in. I'm so glad to have you. So
thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, and thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Claire, both for like hosting this interview with the library. So.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, we'll hope to see you all back on our next one. There's so many interesting stories this whole month of September. And just if you guys ever want to tune in, my company, Preserving with Purpose, we do social hours every Thursday at 10 a.m. Right now we're taking a break, but back in October we'll be doing some social hours, and you can tune into some fascinating stories from all walks of life, all ages, and just being able to listen in and hear those. It's quite amazing. So. Everyone have a good night.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.